and Tarrant here, and this is Meeple University's How to Play Teotihuacan City of Gods.
In this video, we're going to teach you the rules to the game so you can concentrate on your strategy on your game night. Now, let's learn the rules.
In Teotihuacan, players play the role of noble families in ancient Mesoamerica, contributing to the construction of Teotihuacan, the City of Gods, an important archaeological site which can be found outside present-day Mexico City. Players take actions by moving their workers, represented by these dice, around the rondel on the outside of the board. Players don't roll these dice, but as they take actions around the board, they will level these workers up to more powerful workers. Players will earn their victory points in 4 main ways, contributing to the construction of this city. Through the construction and decoration of the central pyramid, through advancing up the Avenue of the Dead and building houses on it, by advancing up the 3 temple worship tracks, and by collecting collections of different masks. The length of the game is tracked by a timing marker, and once it has hit the eclipse on 3 occasions, or once the central pyramid is complete, the end of the game is triggered, and the player with the most victory points wins the game. I'm not going to take you through the full setup for the main board, because the rulebook does explain this in quite good detail, but I will point out a couple of things. When doing the setup on the main board, steps 2, 3, 4 and 5 are optional. In these steps, you'll be covering over some of the printed information on the board with some tiles which randomize the layout and some of the bonuses that are available on the board. This gives the game some added replayability. When doing player setup, you'll have 6 markers which you place on the board at the start of the game in your player colour. 1 on the score track, 1 on each of the temple tracks, 1 on the pyramid track, and 1 below the Avenue of the Dead track. Each player will also place 1 of his or her dice in this region of the board. Here we're showing you a 3-player setup, so we have 3 player colours in these markers, and the initial setup for the pyramid in the centre of the board will also differ depending on player count, and this is the 3-player starting setup, using random tiles. I will take you through the details of player setup. Each player takes the remaining 3 dice in his or her colour, 6 markers, and a token that simply reminds you what colour you're playing when all of your pieces are on the board. Each player takes 4 of the starting tiles at random, and you determine a turn order, with each player taking one of the turn order markers appropriately. Turn order should go clockwise around the board. Whoever is first player takes 1 cocoa. Whoever is last in turn order, regardless of your number of players, takes 3 cocoa, and any other players who are left take 2 cocoa. Then, each player looks at the 4 starting tiles that he or she has been dealt, and will choose 2 of them. These tiles will give the players some additional starting resources and some additional starting bonuses on the board. The numbers down the bottom also tell you where your dice will begin on the board. So, if the player chose to take these 2 starting tiles, then he or she would take 4 wood, 5 stone, 2 more cocoa, move up 2 steps on the blue temple track, gaining the benefit printed on the track for each step which is increased. So in this case, it's 1 additional resource for each step taken. Then the player places each of his or her dice with a value of 1 onto a starting location on the board. Each die must go into a location which matches the numbers on the bottom of one of the tiles chosen, and each die must go into a different location. If you'd prefer not to make this strategic decision around starting tiles at the start of the game, particularly if you're new to the game, then instead of following step 7 of setup, you can follow step 6, which gives you a balanced setup for the game, where the game chooses starting tiles for you. Finally, even if you're playing with fewer than 4 players, it's necessary to have 4 colours of dice on the board. So to place the neutral dice, draw 2 starting tiles, pick the first 3 locations shown at the bottom of those tiles, and then place 1 neutral die into each of those locations. The number on the neutral die does not matter. You're now ready to play. Teotihuacan is a game that is played in a series of turns. On the vast majority of turns, the player will take one of his or her dice and then move it 1, 2, or 3 spaces clockwise around the board, and will then perform one of the 2 or 3 available actions at the destination location. After completing a turn, play passes to the next player clockwise, who does likewise, and so on around the table. After the final player in turn order has taken a turn, the players must advance the light marker 1 space around this crescent. This is a timer for the length of the game, and so players do need to remember to advance this every round. Play continues in this manner until the light disc meets the dark disc, and this triggers an eclipse, which is a mid-game scoring. We'll talk more about the specifics of how eclipses are triggered and scored later on in the video. The game continues until there have been 3 eclipses, or until the pyramid has been completely built. One way or another, this will lead to 3 eclipse scorings, and whoever has the most points at the end of that time wins the game. Next, we'll talk about the 3 different types of actions which can be taken at the various locations. The first and most basic is collecting cocoa, and this can be done at all 8 locations. Cocoa is the lifeblood of the game. You will need to spend reasonable amounts of cocoa in order to perform most of the actions in the game, and so sometimes taking a whole turn just to collect some is necessary to get the actions done that you want to. There are other ways to collect cocoa than this action, but this is the most basic way. To collect cocoa, move your die to a location and then count up the number of different colours of dice that were already present on that tile, excluding any which are in worship locations, which are these spots showing keys. So in this case here, as the blue player lands here, there were already 2 different colours of dice present, and this includes the neutral colour. Then take that much cocoa plus 1. So in this case, the player would take 3 cocoa. The player's own colour counts in this, so if the blue player came here later, there are now 3 different colours of unlocked dice on that location before the player's die got there, and so the player would take 3 plus 1 equals 4 cocoa. The second type of action, which is available at 5 of the different locations on the board, is to worship. And worshipping is any location which shows a single occupancy space for 1 die with a key lock underneath it. On 4 of the locations where you can worship, this is represented by a coloured strip down the left-hand side of the tile, and this is the type that we're going to focus on first. In order to take a worship action, the player moves a die onto the worship space. If there is already a die of another player's colour on the location to worship, the player may still worship but must pay 1 cocoa in order to kick the existing player out of that slot. Players cannot kick their own dice out of worship slots in this way. Then the player has 3 options when worshipping at one of these spaces. The player can move up 1 step on the corresponding temple track, and then immediately claim the bonus which is printed underneath that new space. The player could take the discovery tile which is present on the bottom of this location. If the tile has a cost, which is shown up in the top left-hand corner, the player must pay that when taking the tile. When taking a tile, the player adds it to his or her collection, and we'll talk about how they get used or scored later in the video. Then replace it with a new tile from the stack of leftover tiles. The player's third option is to pay an additional cocoa in order to perform both of those. That is, take the discovery tile and go up a temple track. If a player chooses to worship at this location, he or she chooses one of the 3 temple tracks to move up. He or she does not move up all 3. Worshipping at the palace location, number 1, works a little bit differently. When a player moves there, he or she chooses one of the 3 worship tiles to move into, and then takes the bonus action printed underneath it, and this will not involve moving up a temple. Then the player may also pay a cocoa in order to take the discovery tile printed underneath. Again, the player must pay the cost of the discovery tile before taking it, and it will be replaced with a new tile from the stacks. Unlike at the other worship locations, the player cannot take the discovery tile without doing one of these actions first. Once a die is on a worship location, it is locked there, and this is what is indicated by the key symbol. And that means that a player cannot choose to move that die on his or her turn. That die will be fixed there until another player pays Coco to move it out, or until a player takes actions to unlock them. To unlock his or her dice, a player must pay 3 Coco in order to unlock them all at once, or in order to unlock them for free, the player must spend his or her entire turn simply unlocking all dice that are currently in locked spaces. If the player does this, he or she will move no dice and take no additional actions on this turn. This is the only circumstance on which a player will not be moving his or her dice on a given turn. If the player chooses to pay the 3 Coco to unlock his or her dice, then he or she can move as usual on that turn. I'll take a quick break from the actions in the game to describe the temple tracks. There are 3 temple tracks in the game, blue, red and green, and players will be moving their markers up these during the games through worshipping and other actions. Whenever a player moves one step up a temple track, he or she immediately claims the printed benefit. On the blue track, it's resources, or victory points at the top. On the red track, it's victory points. And on the green track, it's Coco, with victory points at the very top. When a player enters a space showing a stack of discovery tiles, the player takes them and looks at them, and then chooses a discovery tile of his or her choice. The player may look at them before advancing to the space. Once again, if taking a discovery tile with a cost printed in the corner, this must be paid when the player takes that tile. And unlike at the worship spaces, when a player takes a discovery tile from the temple tracks, it is not replenished. Alternatively, if a player doesn't want to take one of the discovery tiles or can't afford any of them, then the player simply takes the printed bonus on the board underneath those tiles. There is no immediate bonus for reaching the penultimate space on one of these tracks. However, it will unlock a certain end of game victory point bonus which the player will add after the 3rd eclipse. And when a player reaches the top of a temple track, he or she immediately gains a victory point benefit, as well as still having unlocked the end of game victory point bonus, and only a single player can reach the top of each temple track. Next, we'll talk about the main actions which are available at each of the locations on the board, except for location 1, the palace, which has no main action. The only actions available there are worship actions and collecting Coco. There are a few common features of how you activate the main actions on the board, which relates to how you'll want to manipulate your dice around the rondel. And so I'll go through these general concepts first before going through the specifics of the main actions. Across all 7 of the main actions, you'll gain a more powerful action if you have more dice present on the same tile. So in this case, with 1 die, the player would take an action from this weaker top row, but then the 2nd die that's placed would give the player access to the stronger middle row. This means players can get better effects if they cluster their dice together. Secondly, after performing any of the 7 main actions, the player will have access to 1 or 2 power-ups indicated by this icon. A single power-up allows a player to take one of the dice that was involved in that action and then increase it by 1 pip. If the player has 2 power-ups, he or she may spread them across multiple dice or apply them both to the same die. This then has the benefit of giving the players access to more powerful resource gathering actions, and across the 3 locations with resource gathering, higher value dice will move the player to a more valuable column. Additionally, players gain an extra bonus whenever a die is powered up to the number 6, but we'll talk about that later. There is one final general concept to know about all of the main actions, and that is that they cost Coco. In order to determine the Coco cost, count up the number of colours of unlocked dice already on that tile before you place your die there, exactly as we did before when collecting cocoa, and then pay exactly that much cocoa. So in this case, the player would pay 1 cocoa. And in this case, the cocoa cost would be 2. So remember that when you place a die on a location when you're not worshipping, your choices are to gain cocoa, equal to the number of colours already there plus 1, or spend cocoa equal to the number of colours already there in order to take the main action. Next, we'll go through each of the main actions in detail, starting with those at locations 2, 3 and 4. This is the primary location where you'll be gathering resources, with wood gathered at location 2, stone at location 3 and gold at location 4. To use one of these locations, after you've paid your cocoa cost, count up the number of dice that you have at that location, and then refer to that row. Then find the lowest number on all of your dice at that location and use that column. So in this case, 2 dice with a lowest number of 1 gives the player a single wood. After completing the action, you would perform 1 power-up, like so. Then on a subsequent turn, the player could come in with another die like this, again pay a cocoa cost of 2 to perform the main action, and would then take the action from 3 dice with a lowest of 2. So in this case would gain 3 wood and 3 cocoa. So you can see how quickly the benefits will escalate if you can cluster high-valued dice together on these tiles. Then, after completing the action, the player could power up twice. And again remember that you can power up the same die twice or different dice once each. At location 3, the player can gain stone and or victory points. And at location 4, the player can gain gold, victory points, cocoa, and move up 1 or 2 spaces on a temple track of his or her choice, depending on how many dice he or she has there. The next location, location 5, is where players go to gain technologies. And technologies make some of the other actions in the game more powerful. At the start of the game, you'll put 6 technology tiles on the board, and they'll be ordered based on the small number in the top right corner of each tile. And this means that the more powerful actions will always be on the bottom row and the less powerful on the top. To take technologies, the player must go to this location, paying the cocoa for other colours there as usual, and then, depending on which die or dice are placed on that tile, will be limited to the number of technologies available. With a single die, the player can only buy technologies from the top row, unless that single die is already a 4 or a 5, in which case the player can buy from the bottom row, but does not power up the die after the action. If the player has 2 dice on the location, then, after paying the cocoa cost, he or she may choose a technology from anywhere on the board, and will still get 1 power up after the action. To buy a technology, the player must pay the gold cost shown in the top left corner of that tile. Then the player places one of his or her markers onto the chosen technology, and any players who already have a token on that same technology gain 3 victory points. A player may not research the same technology twice. Then the player moves 1 step up the corresponding temple track, so in this case green. Once a player has a certain technology, it will allow the player to take the benefit printed on the tile anytime he or she takes the main action at the location in the bottom right corner of the card. So in this case, 3 victory points every time the player builds at location 8. There are 9 different technology tiles available with the game, and the full explanations of how each is used can be found on page 23 of the rulebook. Location number 6 is the Nobles, and this is where players will be spending wood to build houses and move up the Avenue of the Dead. In order to use this location, pay the cocoa as usual, and then pay 2 wood. Then take the leftmost house from this row and place it into the leftmost available space of the row corresponding to the number of dice you have on the tile. so in this case, the 2 worker space. If your row is full, use the row above. Then immediately score the number of victory points that you covered with the house, in this case 5. Ignore the victory points revealed by the house you took. This is used in another context which we'll go through shortly. Then advance your marker 1 space up the avenue of the dead. When moving up this track, if you enter a space containing discovery tiles, you may take one of these tiles immediately as long as you can pay any cost for them. These are not replenished after you've taken them. Unlike on the temple track space, there is no alternative reward under the discovery tiles if you don't wish to take one. Each step of progress that you make on the Avenue of the Dead will be scored in each of the 3 eclipse phases of the game, but we'll go through that again when we get to eclipse scoring. Finally, do 1 or 2 power-ups depending on which row you're in. I'm going to skip over location 7 for the moment and talk about location 8, which is building up the pyramid. When using this location, pay the cocoa cost as normal and then build up to 1, 2 or 3 tiles from those available here into the pyramid. Each tile that you build will cost you 2 stone and 1 wood for each level above the ground that tile is located. And you can remember these costs based on these icons here. After paying the cost, choose any one of the tiles of your choice and then place it into a space on the pyramid that is vacant and which matches the level of the cost that you paid. Immediately gain the number of victory points shown on the board for that level. Then check the icons on the tile that you've placed to see whether they match the icons that you've covered up. You'll gain 1 extra victory point for each such match. In this example here, just moving that tile away so we can see what was covered, this head matches this head, and this small icon matches this one, but these 2 are not matches. So the player would get a bonus 2 points for that placement. In scoring points for these matches, the colours of the icons, either the one on top or the one that's covered, don't matter. However, if the icon that you place is coloured and it is matching the one underneath it, then you may move 1 step up on the corresponding temple track as well as getting the bonus victory point. So the overall bonus for this placement is the 1 normal victory point, 2 victory points for matching icons, and 1 step up the red temple track, which is in itself worth another victory point. Players may rotate these tiles into whichever orientation they wish when they're making these placements. Symbols are still considered to match, even if they have different orientation, like so. Note that when you're building up the pyramid, you must do so that any tile sits on the intersection of 4 other tiles. This would not be a valid placement because you would not be able to correctly complete the pyramid at the end of the game. After you've placed your tiles and taken the victory points and bonuses for each, move 1 step up the pyramid track for each tile that you've placed. Then power up your dice based on the number of workers you have available, not necessarily the number of tiles that you've placed. And refill the tile market from the leftover stacks. Finally, at location 7, players can add decorations to the pyramid. And this works in a relatively similar way to constructing the pyramid, but there are some subtle differences. In order to use this location, pay the cocoa as usual, and then pay 3 gold in order to choose a decoration and place it on the pyramid. However, as indicated by this iconography, if you have a second worker, that worker comes with its own gold. And if you have 3 workers, each of your other 2 workers come with their own gold. And so essentially you can treat these as a discount. For example, 2 dice means you have a 1 gold discount and would pay 2 gold in order to build a decoration. When placing decorations onto the pyramid, this is what the final pyramid might look like if you completely decorated it. And you can see that decorations start in the center of each of the 4 sides and move stepwise up the pyramid to the penultimate level. These are the only places that you can place decorations. You must place a lower level decoration before you can place any above it. And when placing a decoration, there is a small arrow on the tile, and that must point towards the center of the pyramid. So, having now partially deconstructed the pyramid, if taking a decoration now, the legal locations to place it would be here, as it's on the ground level, here, as it is one step up from an existing decoration, or the ground level point around the back of the pyramid. It is not at this point permissible to place a decoration here because the decoration has to be one level above the one below it. So you would have to wait for this tile to be placed before you could build a decoration further up from this side. So in summary, when you visit the space, you pay the cocoa as usual, you pay the amount of gold depending on the number of dice you have present, choose a decoration, place it in a legal location, gain 3 victory points, and claim bonuses the same way that you did when building tiles. So any symbols that you match will be 1 additional victory point, so in this case 2, and if the symbol that you match has a color, as in the top tile has a color, not beneath it, then you can move 1 step up the corresponding temple track. Then move 1 step up the pyramid track, and again this is going to net you more victory points when the eclipse occurs. Replace the decoration in the available display and power up 1 of your dice. And so that's all of the actions that you can do on your turn. But let's summarize all of those again quickly. As your entire turn, you can choose to unlock all of your locked dice and take no other action. Although remember that on a normal turn, you can spend 3 cocoa in order to do that. On any other turn, you will take 1 of your dice and move it 1, 2, or 3 steps clockwise around the board. At the destination of that die, you will have up to 3 choices. You can collect cocoa, which will be equal to 1 cocoa more than the total number of colours of workers in that location before you got there. You could worship, paying 1 cocoa if you have to knock someone out of the worship space, and then taking either the top benefit or the bottom benefit, or both at the cost of an additional cocoa. Or you can go to a location, pay cocoa equal to the number of colours of unlocked dice that was already present, and then take the main action at that location. The power of the action that you take will depend on the number of dice you have on that tile, and may depend on the number of pips on those dice. At locations 2, 3, or 4, you'll be gaining the game's 3 main building resources, wood, stone, and gold, as well as some other fringe benefits. At location 5, you'll be paying gold in order to gain technologies which will make some of your other actions more powerful. At location 6, you'll be paying wood in order to build houses, gain victory points, and move up on the Avenue of the Dead. At location 7, you'll be paying gold in order to build decorations onto the pyramid, which is worth victory points as well as steps on the pyramid track. And at location 8, you'll be spending stone and possibly wood in order to build tiles onto the pyramid, which is again worth victory points and steps up the pyramid track. Players can also visit the palace, where they will have additional special worship tiles available. When play passes from the last player in turn order to the first player in turn order, advance the light marker around the eclipse track. During the game, players will ultimately power some of their workers up to a number 6. When this happens, that worker ascends, and you go through the following steps. First, move 1 step up the track of the Avenue of the Dead. Then take that worker, reset its number to 1, and place it in the palace location. Thematically, your old worker is having a noble burial, and your new worker is coming into play. Then, claim 1 of the 5 benefits printed around this circle on the board. 5 victory points, spending 3 cocoa to move up 2 temple tracks, or the same temple track twice, gaining 2 cocoa and gaining a new worker set to number 3, which is placed in the palace, moving up 1 temple track for free, or gaining 5 cocoa. And note that the rulebook says 6 cocoa while the board says 5. Use 5. Finally, advance the light marker 1 space forward. The more ascensions there are in the game, the quicker the game will go. I've spoken a few times through the video about collecting discovery tiles, and now I'll come back and talk about how you use them. When you collect discovery tiles, you immediately pay the cost as shown in the top left corner if there is a cost. If there's no cost, then it comes for free, and place it face up in front of you. Then, at any subsequent point in the game, you can flip the tile face down to take its once-off effect. So in this case, you'd move 1 step up the red temple track. Most of the time, there's no reason not to flip these tiles immediately, such as this one, which lets you move up the Avenue of the Dead. However, this one that lets you take 3 resources of your choice, you might hang on to that until you know exactly what 3 resources help you the most. The other type of discovery tile that you might have are the masks, and there are 7 different types of masks, and the number of each type is shown in small print down in the bottom right corner of the tile. You will score points for sets of different masks during each eclipse, and we'll talk about this in more detail in the eclipse phase. But the masks otherwise have no power and are never flipped face down. Even though you can never use these again, you do keep them face down in front of you, as some endgame scoring conditions are based on how many tiles you've collected. A quick note back to setup of the game. There are a couple of starting tiles that have some icons which we didn't go through at the start of the video because they wouldn't have made sense yet, and now I want to come back and talk about them. If you take the starting tile that shows the technology tile icon, then you are allowed to take the lowest cost technology for free at the start of the game. This will be the one in the top left corner of the board, and because of the way these are ordered, it should be the least powerful. You do not have to pay the gold cost, but you do get the temple track bonus. The second one shows the power up icon, and this allows you to begin the game with one of your dice set to a 2. And you can choose which one based on the placements that you make at the start of the game. The last one is the discovery tile, and if you've drawn tiles that show discovery tiles on them, then you take a discovery tile from the leftover supply and associate it with that tile. This is done before you've chosen the 2 tiles you want to take out of the 4 you've been dealt. Then, if you choose that tile, you get to take that specific discovery token with it. Note, however, that you do have to be able to pay for the tile. So if you wanted to take this tile and get that mask, you would also need to take a starting tile which granted you some wood. Once the light disc meets the dark disc, an eclipse is triggered. Complete the current round of play and then play 1 more full round of play. Ignore any advancements of the light disc during this time. Then proceed to eclipse scoring, which is summarized in this little section here. First, score on the Avenue of the Dead. Each player multiplies the number of steps he or she has moved up the Avenue of the Dead by the lowest visible number remaining under the house track, and this will decline all the way down to 1 by the end of the game if all the houses are built. So in this case, the blue player would get 4 times 4 is 16 points for the Avenue of the Dead. Then score the pyramid track. The player or players who have moved the furthest down the pyramid track gain 4 points, and then all players score for the number of steps they've moved down the pyramid track. This score will be 4 points at the first eclipse, 3 points at the second eclipse, and 2 points at the third eclipse. So if this were the first eclipse, then the blue player would receive 5 times 4 is 20 points, plus 4 for leading the track on the pyramid track. All players move back to the start of the pyramid track for the next phase of the game. This is not true of the Avenue of the Dead. Players then score for sets of different masks that they've collected based on this track here. So if a player has 1 mask, it's worth 1 point, 2 different masks are worth 3 points, 3 different masks are worth 6, and so on up to all 7 types of masks being worth 28 points for the set. If a player has matching masks, these will form into a different set, and so this collection would be considered a set of 3 and a set of 1. Players will continue collecting masks through the game and don't lose the ones they have, so masks gained early in the game will score multiple times. Next, all players must feed their workers. Look at any workers that you've activated. If they have power 1, 2 or 3, it will cost you 1 cocoa, and a power of 4 or 5 will cost you 2 cocoa. So in this case, the blue player would pay 5 cocoa. Paying the cocoa is optional, but any cocoa that you cannot pay out of this total bill will cost you 3 victory points. Then set the light marker back to the start of the track and move the dark marker 1 step closer to the start, so subsequent rounds will play more quickly than the earlier ones. Finally, if you're playing with 4 or fewer players, then you'll have a neutral colour in the game, and this is when you move the neutral colours around. For each neutral colour, draw 2 starting tiles, and then move the dice to the first 3 numbers printed on the 2 tiles that you've drawn. In this case, 6, 8 and 5. They'll stay there until the next eclipse. The end of the game is triggered when the 3rd eclipse occurs. Or, if the final tile is placed on the top of the pyramid, this automatically triggers the 3rd eclipse. Either way, get to the eclipse the same way you normally would, by completing the current round and then performing 1 more round. And complete the 3rd eclipse scoring as normal. Finally, as the only extra step of final scoring beyond the usual eclipse scoring, any player who has reached the second last or last step on one of the temple tracks gains the victory point bonus shown for that temple track. And the back page of the rulebook will show you what these icons mean. The player with the highest score wins, and in the event of a tie, the player with the most leftover cocoa wins, and if still tied, whoever was earlier in turn order wins the game.
And that's how to play Teotihuacan City of Gods.
We hope you enjoyed this video, and we hope you enjoyed playing. And if you'd like to see the game in action, you can click on the link in the description to check out our 1-round playthrough for this game.
If you have any questions, comments, feedback, or just want to say hi to us, please write in the comment sections below.
And finally, if you'd like to be among the first to know what's new from Meeple University, please consider subscribing to our channel. You can click on the Meeple in the corner. It will help us to monetize this channel and put back into it to bring continuing quality content for you.
Until next time.